Hey everybody, we're continuing our tour of Audio Advice Live. I now find myself in the Sonus faber room with Will Kline, who's one of my good buddies in the industry. For those of you who have seen the two of us together before, well, if you know, you know, but we're together again, different context. This is the Stradivari, the newest version of the Stradivari. Those of us that have known and loved hi-fi for some time, we know that the Stradivari has been an icon in the entire industry. It was a huge deal when it was originally released and really set the bar for what a smooth, warm, but detailed sounding speaker ought to be. And it had the iconic shape, which of course is also back. But now we enter this new generation that has essentially, at least in our market, been placed in between the new Homage and the reference series. So it's kind of in a unique place, but you can see it takes a lot of cues from the new Homage series. Recognize that phase plug, anybody? That's right, you can see it. But it's extraordinary, and I'm going to spend more time with it, and then I'll give you my own thoughts on it later as well. But Will, you are Mr. Sonus faber and the warrior poet of audio, as I like to say. So tell me about the Stradivari. I know that the speaker's amazing. I know a couple things going on with it, but you are the guy.
Yeah, one must first think about the original Stradivari. First developed in 2002, Sonus faber's first flagship speaker. And it was an amazing event for us, the development of that product, because it allowed us to dig deep into our philosophy and come up with all sorts of brand new solutions that we had never derived before. All right. And as any flagship should for any company, we learned a lot from it. The whole process of building it allowed us to really get a little further in cabinet structure and refinement. The driver complement that we used for that, the way the drivers were configured, the new crossover that we developed for it, there was a lot of intellectual property there with the Stradivari. And as such, even to this day, it's largely considered one of the best speakers that Sonus faber has ever made.
Oh, yeah.
Now, personally, I think the Il Cremonese, our current $55K offering, and certainly something like the Lilium, just outperforms it in just about every way. But there was something to be said about that wide baffle design that's really difficult in terms of the properties that you get from the sound presentation, really difficult to recreate without that wide baffle. Having this wide baffle design allows for not only less of the information, especially from the mid-range and tweeter, getting into the back part of the room, thereby creating time delays and reflections that are going to be unwanted, but it also allows more of that energy to be directed into the crowd, directly toward the listener. So I always liken it to a fine panel speaker mid-range production where you've got this beautiful floating mid-range in space, air and space all the way around it. And there's a presence there, there's an immediacy, there's a great deal of that information that represents the physical presence of that instrument or that singer. And it's really difficult to do without this wide baffle design. So this speaker certainly takes advantage of some of those attributes. But what really blew me away about these is the entire package from top to bottom is significantly superior to the next best thing that we would compare it to, which would be the Amati, which is one of my favorite, and I know one of your favorite speakers of all time ever.
Oh, yeah.
I did not expect to come away having experienced these for the first time saying, you know what? If you can afford these, you should buy them. There's nothing that they do worse. I mean, there's nothing that they don't do better.
And it's funny that you say that because you were telling me your experience of like, okay, this is the Amati, kind of similar, a little bit different price point, but not too far. And it's like, well, which one? And I remember when this got announced, I'm looking at it like, man, it looks beautiful. I love the design, but am I really going to take this over an Amati? And it's like, the Amati's amazing. The Amati's amazing. Okay,
no question.
But there is something to the Stradivari here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing you're going to notice, besides the shape of the cabinet, is while the brand new version, Gen 5 of the Amati, uses a newly developed dual voice coil 8-inch woofer, two of them in fact, we're actually using a brand new 10-inch version on this speaker. Right? So we've got the same ability to have additional control of those dual voice coils, additional excursion, more bass, lower bass, but of course with the 10-inch package here, you're going to get more effortless, very, very low bass and even infra bass from this speaker that really renders very large instruments and large sound stages to life. You cannot fake the physics of that.
Those infrasonics, that's the next dimension.
It really is, literally. You know, it really is what adds that sense of space and that sense of dimension to the soundstage. Especially a full range recording, especially when there's lots of instrumentations like large symphony pieces. It is really, really difficult with a smaller driver form factor to be able to recreate the experience that you would have at actually being at that symphony.
Yeah.
With this speaker, there is nothing left to be desired. I mean, these absolutely give me 100% of what I'm looking for in terms of the bass that goes through you, in terms of the depiction of ultra large instruments and even, synthetic things that, have no size in real space, right? But still kind of completely fill the room when properly presented. I've been very impressed with these. The more I listen to them, the more impressed I become. I keep joking. I'm going to take a measuring tape home when I get home and figure out exactly where these are going to go, because I'm pretty sure I'm getting a pair.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm going to go back to that word dimension. Even when I just strolled into the room for the first time, it was just filling.
Yes, they're awe-inspiring. They're kind of jaw-dropping in a way. They're a bit stunning. They kind of stop you in your tracks, especially in the red finish. Of course, we got the Wenge finish here, which just has a beautiful depth to it.
Oh, yeah.
But of course, I never spend too much time talking about the aesthetic of Sonus faber. I think it speaks for itself. What's really important for this is we've got several brand new technologies that we've developed for the entire Homage line. And specifically for this speaker, there's actually 2 patents that we've applied for. One for the porting system. There's a brand new porting system in this. It's actually down firing, and it's loaded in such a way that it actually creates an even more effortless and omnidirectional bass output than pretty much anything we've ever made. It takes a lot of inspiration from the AIDA, in fact, our flagship speaker. Obviously, we talked about the 10-inch drivers, the new dual voice coil, the neodymium slug that we developed for this is gorgeous. I wish there was a way we could actually see the back of the drivers from the speakers, because they're just as gorgeous as the speakers themselves.
The back of the drivers and the Amatis, when he showed me those, it was like, it's a shame that no one's ever going to look at that.
Exactly, yep. So exactly same form factor, just larger basket, larger diaphragm, right? So they have that beautiful anodized red kind of jet engine looking neodymium magnet design. And obviously the aesthetics are quite nice, but the important thing, the real goal for that particular project was not only to create lower bass and more of it, but to create bass that had more texture and detail, to be able to control the driver at its minimum extrusion amount so that we can really, really tailor that ability to depict the textures and, the idea of whether that bass, that kick drum was being hit by a cotton mallet or a leather mallet. Right? Those subtle details, the vibrato in the undertones of a stand-up bass, those subtle details that really bring the instrument to life. This does an amazing job at depicting that, as does the Amati. But again, with this additional, just more surface area of driver interfacing with the air, it's not only deeper and lower in terms of bass response, it's also more effortless. So you get a sense of that room-filling bass without feeling like you're working your amplifier harder, like feeling like you're testing the system or taking it to its limits. It's just effortless with absolutely anything you throw at it.
Whenever you guys hear any of us describe anything as effortless, it is a little hard to put that feeling into words. But when you get in front of a system like this, you kind of know it immediately when you hear it. And it's often, it's often that X factor that makes you want to take those speakers home.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. As with the rest of the Homage multi-ways, we developed a new technology. This is patented. It's called Intono. Intono is essentially a way of partitioning the individual cabinets that are inside of the speaker that house the mid-range and tweeter with a porting system, right? So during the normal rate of, or the normal run of the mid-range driver's excursion, the porting system essentially doesn't do anything, right? But with an internal cabinet, when you've got a sealed enclosure for any of the drivers, or the whole system for that matter, but certainly for your mid-range, there's going to be a certain frequency range that you will arrive at where the pressure inside of that sealed enclosure, inside of that sealed chamber, becomes so great that it actually starts to impede the natural movement of the driver, right? So that force, that's impedance of physical motion, will actually translate to electrical impedance in your amplifier, right? So now we've got a driver that at certain frequencies is more difficult to drive for your amplifier than the rest of the system, right? So what many manufacturers do when they get into that situation is you will essentially raise the impedance of the entire rest of the system to match it so that it's a nice flat impedance, right?
Right.
We know not optimal because
but
then
that's a compromise.
You're working. Yeah, it's a compromise that many manufacturers and even ourselves in the past have made. With the Intono technology, essentially what we're doing is we're utilizing the individual sealed enclosures and we're utilizing the tuning of a port in between them such that when the pressure builds up such that it would actually create an impedance spike in the mid-range frequencies, that port fails or opens up, right? And it's no longer a port with vibrating air back and forth. It's essentially a hole that allows for that pressure to dissipate into another enclosed chamber, right? So we're actually taking the failure of a port, we're taking the detriment of a ported system, and we're actually using it to our advantage because we know there's going to be a certain frequency where that port opens up and just allows natural passage of that air back and forth. And we can tune that port to the exact frequency where we have that huge spike in the mid-range and the enclosure that the mid-range have building up that air pressure. And so this brilliant way, for me, it's so simple. I'm really surprised nobody thought of it but us, but we were the first ones.
Though, yeah.
And it's absolutely something that not only improves overall sound quality, but allows us to build simpler crossovers because we don't have to compensate for the impedance differences at different frequencies. So simpler parts, fewer parts, a simpler, signal path will always yield to more clarity, more detail, more presence of the information being presented. So yeah, we're really proud of that. And you can notice it on the entire Homage series versus the previous generation. There's a sense of immediacy and presence in the room with you, and an impact in the mid-range that we've just never really been able to do before. So yeah, we've certainly included that. And of course, in the voice of Sonus faber, we've also got another special little unique to the Homage series currently, but this is the latest and greatest of our mid-range design. So what we're looking at is a phase plug, and a phase plug, if you're not familiar, is essentially the static part of a moving mid-range driver. And we essentially make that part static such that it doesn't have as much of a resonant frequency at a particular frequency peak. Right? Also on the time domain, having a phase system or having a phase plug as opposed to a dust cap gives you more clarity and a correct timing for the frequencies that we're actuating there. But with this, we went ahead and turned that phase plug into a waveguide. Right? So essentially this is doing the dual duty of correcting for the timing, but also for correcting for the propagation. So if you can imagine the sound waves emanating from this center driver, they essentially wrap around this waveguide, fold in on themselves, creating a pressure pocket. And then after the wave propagates out into normal listening spaces, about 6 or 8 feet or so, it actually explodes again. It gives us a nice, consistent crescent-shaped front wave. Right? Incredibly important, not something that many speaker manufacturers pay attention to. In fact, most measurements on drivers are made at 1 meter in an anechoic chamber. Right? Useful scientifically for comparing different things,
right.
But from a listening standpoint, that's not a measurement that applies to me whatsoever, right? I want to know how it sounds 8 feet out, 10 feet out. So this speaker uses the propagation of the mid-range driver and essentially manipulates it such that we get much, much more accuracy at real listening distances. Right?
That's what we want.
So that's our new phase plug. Brand new, latest and greatest generation of our natural drivers. Can we start with a cellulose pulp? We add to that many different natural materials, essentially to arrive at the best balance of the different criteria by which we build a driver diaphragm. So they need to be light, they need to be stiff, and they need to be quiet. Very important.
Remember you once told me, like, if you can go up to a driver and carefully, of course, flick it, if it makes a loud noise back at you, it's not really an optimal driver.
Absolutely. What is heard cannot be unheard. So yeah, whatever that sound is, the resonant frequency of your mid-range driver, or any driver in the system really, whenever the music or whatever you're listening to reaches that frequency, there's going to be a huge spike at that particular frequency. It just makes sense. You're activating the noise from the driver. And what many manufacturers to this day will continue to do is actually build a notch filter into their crossovers to compensate for the noise that the driver's creating. So Sonus faber has always been obsessed with making the quietest, especially mid-range drivers that we possibly can. It avoids having to make that notch filter. And again, our crossovers are simpler and more pure as a result.
Yeah, the less of a crossover you need, the better.
Absolutely.
That's like a simple principle, right?
Yep. In the analog domain anyway. Once you start getting into digital stuff, it's a little different. But yeah, as far as
definitely
analog
different
crossovers go, the simpler, the better.
Very good. Well, that is an awesome run through, man. And we'll have some fun listening for a little while.
And there's a whole bunch of other features that I'm not even going to have time to get into. You've got this amazing window in the back that shows the crossover through, much like we did on the Maxima Amateur, right? So that's a new little feature of the Homage series. I've never seen that. We've actually got a bass loading configuration jumper on the back of each speaker. So if I want a little bump in my lowest frequencies, I could go ahead and adjust that according for the room. You see this beautiful wood finished speaker plate terminal, or speaker terminal plate. We just had to do that. Just had to. And this,
that
of
reminds
course,
me of like something off a reference series speaker, is how the flat plate like that.
absolutely, yeah, inspired by some of the larger creations. And this is actually one of the 40th anniversary editions. So what you're going to see is this beautiful kind of 45-degree grain through the speaker in any of the three colors.
The
that
chevron
we do.
is awesome.
Chevron shape, yeah. And then of course we got this beautiful plate that has the individual serial numbers for the first 40 pairs of each color, essentially.
Oh man, I always had to get one of those first 40 pairs just for that, because I love chevron patterns of wood. Like this is art to me.
It really is. And with a speaker like this, well, most of our speakers, I think, have a certain timelessness to it, a certain classic design that will go in just about any environment. With something like this, you really have to be prepared to have it be the focal point of your living space, right? You're not just going to plop this down and kind of have them blend in, right? So I recommend go for the red, go for the wild colors, do something avant-garde, make it the centerpiece of your living room and your living space. And
because it deserves to be.
It does. Let it paint the picture for anyone visiting your home that this is someone who's serious about music, that they're not playing around.
Awesome. Well, Will, thanks so much, man. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to see you, brother.
Absolutely. And we're going to do some listening of the Stradivari's here, and we'll see you in the next row.